Most of us book hotels or Airbnbs with one simple thought in mind: a place to rest, a safe private space to close the door, unpack our bags, and feel like we can let our guard down. But privacy isn't always guaranteed. Behind the walls, inside vents, disguised as everyday objects, cameras can be hidden where you'd least expect them. And sometimes you only discover them when it's far too late. The stories you're about to hear aren't urban legends. They're real accounts of travelers who booked what they thought was a harmless stay, only to find themselves watched, recorded, and stalked by strangers who knew every move they made. So tonight, lock your doors, dim the lights, and keep an eye on the shadows in your own room. Because after these stories, you may never look at that smoke detector, mirror, or alarm clock the same way again. I booked an Airbnb a couple of years ago during a work trip. It was in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Nothing special, just a basement suite with a separate entrance. The listing had a ton of good reviews, so I didn't even hesitate when I confirmed the reservation. The host greeted me when I arrived. He was maybe in his late 40s, polite, but a little off. He kept making small talk longer than necessary, asking about my work, where I was from, how long I'd be staying. At the time, I just chalked it up to him being overly friendly. The suite itself was cozy, a small living room, kitchenette, and bedroom. Everything seemed clean, but the air felt heavy, like I was being observed. I told myself it was just the exhaustion from travel. That night, after unpacking, I noticed something odd. The smoke detector above the bed looked newer than everything else in the room. The plastic casing was bright white, while the rest of the fixtures were slightly yellowed with age. It also had a tiny green LED that flickered irregularly, almost like it was alive. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was just a newer model, but as I tried to fall asleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the light wasn't normal. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it up at the detector. For a second, I thought I saw something glint inside the vent holes, like a small glass lens reflecting back. That's when my stomach dropped. I got out of bed and stood on a chair to get a closer look. My heart was hammering. When I tilted the detector slightly, I realized it wasn't attached properly. The screws were loose. I unscrewed it carefully. Inside was not a normal smoke detector. It was a tiny camera. Wires coiled around a small battery pack with an SD card tucked in the side. I froze. The first thought that hit me wasn't just someone's watching me. Someone has already been watching me. Panic set in. I had been walking around, unpacking, even changing clothes in that room. Who knew how long the camera had been running, or who was on the other end? I shoved the device into my backpack, grabbed my phone, and called Airbnb support. My voice was shaking as I explained what I'd found. The rep told me to leave immediately for my own safety. I bolted out of the basement and into the driveway. It was past midnight. The house was dark, but as I was fumbling with my keys to get into my rental car, I noticed a curtain on the second floor shift, just slightly. Like someone was standing there, watching me. I didn't wait. I drove off and parked at a gas station down the road, where I sat for nearly an hour, trying to calm down. I kept replaying every second in my head, every glance from the host, every weird flicker of that little green light. Eventually, I got through to Airbnb again. They offered to book me a hotel and promised to investigate. I handed the camera over to the police the next morning. They told me they'd seen setups like this before. Hosts hiding cameras and smoke detectors, alarm clocks, even phone chargers. The worst part? Weeks later, the detective called me back. He said the SD card had several videos already saved. Most were from my stay, me unpacking, brushing my teeth, lying in bed. But there were also clips of other guests before me. People who had no idea they were being recorded. And one of the final videos? It wasn't from inside the basement, it was from upstairs. The host's camera aimed directly down through the curtain at me, standing in the driveway the night I discovered the device. He had been watching me leave. I never heard what happened to the host after that. Airbnb refunded my money and assured me they'd banned him from the platform, but I can't say I ever felt comfortable booking with them again. Even now, years later, I can't stay in a hotel or rental without checking every corner. I'll shine my flashlight on every smoke detector, unplug every alarm clock, even cover mirrors with towels. Because once you realize how easy it is for someone to watch you without your knowledge, you never really feel alone again. I was traveling for a conference last year, and I checked into a mid-range hotel downtown. Nothing fancy, just one of those business hotels with a generic lobby, beige walls, and the faint smell of air freshener masking something stale underneath. My room was on the 8th floor. When I walked in, everything looked normal. 2 queen beds, a desk, a TV mounted to the wall, and a large mirror across from the bathroom door. At first glance, it was just a mirror, but something about it unsettled me almost immediately. I noticed it when I was unpacking. As I set my bag down, I glanced into the mirror, and for some reason, the reflection looked a little off. My movement seemed a fraction of a second delayed, like the glass wasn't quite in sync with reality. I chalked it up to exhaustion and jet lag. Still, I found myself avoiding looking at it directly. Every time I did, I felt like I was being observed, not just reflected. That night, after dinner, I came back to the room. I was scrolling on my phone, half watching the muted TV, when I caught something in my peripheral vision. In the mirror's reflection, I thought I saw movement, a shift, like someone stepping just out of frame. But when I turned, there was nothing, just the still room. I told myself it was in my head, but I couldn't shake the unease, so I decided to test the mirror. I remembered something I'd read online about two-way mirrors. If you press your fingernail against the glass and there's no gap between your nail and its reflection, it could mean the mirror is see-through. I walked over, pressed my finger to the glass, and felt my heart skip when I saw it. No gap. My fingertip touched its reflection directly. Panic began to set in. I leaned close and cupped my hands around the sides of my face to block the light. I stared into the glass, straining to see beyond my reflection. At first, it was just black. But then, faintly, I saw something. The outline of a small space, a chair, and what looked like wires. It wasn't just a mirror. There was a room behind it. I stumbled back, heart pounding. There was no way I was imagining this. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight, shining it across the mirror. The beam caught something in the corner, a pinhole glint, a camera lens. Someone had set up a hidden observation room behind the mirror. I didn't waste a second. I called the front desk, trying to keep my voice steady as I told them I needed a manager immediately. Within minutes, 2 hotel staff showed up. When I explained, they looked skeptical until they saw it for themselves. The manager's face went pale. He ordered maintenance to open the paneling around the mirror. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, big enough for a person to stand in. Inside was a folding chair, empty food wrappers, and wires running into a small recording device. The staff called the police right away. While waiting, I couldn't stop staring into that hollow space. It felt tainted. Knowing someone had been sitting just feet away from me, watching, recording, it made my skin crawl. When the officers arrived, they confirmed the device was active. The SD card inside had hours of recorded footage, and most of it was from my very room. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. The last video on the card was time-stamped less than an hour before I made the discovery, meaning whoever had been watching me had just left. The investigation that followed revealed that the crawl space extended along several rooms on that floor. It wasn't part of the original hotel design. Someone had modified it, creating a hidden passage. Even creepier, hotel management told police that only staff would have had access to the construction plans. That implied one of two things. Either a current employee was involved, or a former one still had access. I ended up cutting my trip short. I checked into another hotel across town, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow, every creak of the air vent felt like I was being watched again. Weeks later, I followed up on the case. The police told me the investigation was ongoing, but no one had been arrested. They couldn't prove which employee had set up the crawl space, and security footage of the floor showed nothing, as if the person knew exactly where the cameras were. Even now, I can't look at mirrors the same way. Every time I stay in a hotel, I test them. Sometimes I'll even refuse a room if the mirrors look suspicious. Because once you've seen the space behind the glass, you can't shake the thought that someone might be in there, waiting silently, recording every moment. And worst of all, you'll never know how many times they've already watched you. I was driving cross-country last summer, staying mostly in cheap motels along the way. For the most part, it was uneventful. Dingy rooms, buzzing AC units, paper-thin walls. But one night, in a small town off the interstate, I checked into a place that felt different the second I walked in. It was one of those roadside motels with a faded neon sign, half the lights burned out, and an empty lobby that smelled faintly of cigarettes. The clerk barely looked at me when I paid. His eyes seemed tired, or maybe just uninterested. My room was near the end of the hall, beige carpet stained from years of neglect, curtains that didn't quite close, and furniture that looked like it belonged in the 1980s. But the thing that stuck out the most was the alarm clock on the nightstand. It wasn't digital like most places. Instead, it looked bulky, old, with a strange tinted front cover. The red LED numbers glowed faintly, but the display seemed off, dimmer than it should have been. When I leaned closer, I realized why. Behind the plastic screen, just beneath the glowing numbers, was a small circular lens. It was a camera. I froze, trying to process. My brain scrambled between disbelief and fear. Surely it wasn't what I thought. Maybe it was just some weird design. But the longer I looked, the more obvious it became. It wasn't part of the display. It was recessed with a faint metallic rim. And once I noticed it, I realized something worse. The alarm clock wasn't even plugged in. I grabbed my phone flashlight, tilted the clock, and sure enough, there was a hole cut in the back where a USB cable snaked inside. It was battery-powered, modified. The camera was live. I felt sick. I'd only been in the room for 10 minutes, and already someone might have been recording me. I shoved the clock into my backpack, heart racing. My instinct was to leave immediately, but part of me wanted proof, so I searched the rest of the room, and I found more. In the bathroom, the vent above the shower looked newer than the rest of the cracked tile. When I climbed up on the edge of the tub and looked closer, there was another lens behind the grate. Whoever set this up hadn't just hidden one camera. They had the entire room wired. I didn't even finish checking. I just grabbed my things and stormed out of the room. The hallway felt endless. My pulse was hammering, my palms slick with sweat. As I passed the front desk, I noticed the clerk glance up. For the first time, his eyes weren't tired or uninterested. They were sharp, watching me. I didn't stop. I pushed through the lobby doors and sprinted to my car. I drove until I found a gas station off the highway and parked under the bright lights. That's where I called the police. My hands were still shaking as I explained what I'd discovered. When the officers arrived, I handed over the alarm clock. They promised to check the room and follow up. I asked if this kind of thing happened often. One of the officers exchanged a glance with his partner before saying, "More than you'd think." Later that night, they called me back with what they'd found. The cameras weren't just recording, they were streaming, live. Someone had been watching me in real time the moment I stepped into that room. Worse, the signal wasn't coming from inside the motel. The feed was routed elsewhere. The police tried to trace it, but hit a dead end. Whoever set it up knew what they were doing. They'd hidden transmitters in the vents and furniture, feeding video to an unknown receiver. The motel staff claimed ignorance, of course. The clerk insisted he didn't know anything. But I'll never forget the way he looked at me as I left, like he knew exactly what I'd found. I drove all night after that, too paranoid to stop. Every rest area bathroom, every diner mirror, I kept checking, convinced I was still being watched. Even now, I cover up every hotel alarm clock, every vent, every suspicious object. I've even bought my own hidden camera detector. Because here's the truth. When you find one camera, there's rarely just one. And once you've seen your own reflection staring back through the glass of a lens, you never forget it. If you've made it this far, you're probably checking the corners of your own room right now. Smoke detectors, mirrors, alarm clocks. They're supposed to make us feel safe. But in the wrong hands, they're the perfect hiding places for prying eyes. Which of these stories made you think twice about booking your next stay? Let me know in the comments. I'm always reading them. If you enjoyed this, make sure to check out my other creepy files, because there are plenty more stories waiting for you in the dark.